A girl left tied to a tree in a deadly storm. But what happened next will shock you. Watch till the end, hit like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. The storm had been building all afternoon, a low growl across the fields of Oakfield County that grew into something feral as night descended. Wind tore through the corn stubble, bending trees until they groaned like wounded animals. Sheets of rain slashed the earth, turning dirt roads into rivers of mud. In the chaos of thunder and lightning, the old oak tree at the edge of Miller's Creek stood as it always had, unshaken, massive, and a movable witness to the cruelty that was unfolding beneath its branches. Emma Wilson hung against the bark, her wrists bound with a rough rope that bit into her skin each time she struggled. The cords were wet, slick from rain, but they held fast. She shivered violently, soaked through, her teeth clattering with each cold gust. Panic pressed against her chest, but she fought to stay calm. Somewhere, deep inside, she believed that if she survived until morning, someone would come. Her breath hitched as she remembered the laughter. Brad Dawson's smug grin, the way he had shoved her against the tree while Megan and Dylan stood by, uncertain, scared but silent. She had begged them to stop, told them this wasn't a joke, but Brad's anger had burned hotter than reason. He had tied the rope himself, pulled it tight, and left her to the storm. "Let's see how the farm girl likes being put in her place," he had sneered before they drove away. The cold was worse than the fear. Her body was losing heat fast, every drop of rain leaching away warmth. Emma's mind swirled with the fragments of thought, her mother's smile, the fire in their living room, the unfinished history paper that had started this nightmare. She forced her head up, blinking through rain. Her jacket pocket bulged faintly with something she had hidden for years, a small, battered flip phone. Her hands trembled as she twisted her fingers against the rope. The bark was rough, and it scraped her skin raw, but the fibers frayed just enough for her to slide one hand free. With clumsy desperation, she dug into her pocket, pulling out the cheap phone she had bought with her allowance months ago. Inside the back cover, taped carefully, was a pair of old military dog tags. The numbers engraved there had been given to her 8 years ago by a man who had once lived on their farm for a summer. A man who had promised, "If you ever need me, call this number, only in a real emergency." This was beyond an emergency. Her fingers shook so violently that she nearly dropped the phone, but she managed to punch in the digits. For a moment, there was only static, and she thought the storm would drown even the signal. Then a voice, deep, steady, immediately recognizable, came through the line. "Emma?" Her throat closed. She hadn't spoken that name to him in years, but somehow he knew. "Jack, it's me. They left me. I'm tied to the oak tree near Miller's Creek. Her voice broke. "It's so cold." "Stay calm," Jack Reeves said, his tone firm, controlled, carrying the weight of countless missions where panic meant death. "I've got your location. Hold on, Emma, I'm on my way." "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "Yes, you can. Listen to me. Keep talking. I'm not hanging up until you're safe." Thunder cracked overhead, nearly splitting the sky. The line crackled, but his voice cut through the storm with absolute certainty. "I'm coming for you." On the other end of the call, Lieutenant Colonel Jack Reeves, U.S. Army Delta Force, was already moving. He had been diverted to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base with his team due to weather, but he knew the ground better than most maps. Still, the storm was closing roads, flooding creeks, and grounding aircraft. He needed another option, someone already nearby. His mind went to a contact, an unlikely ally, but one he trusted to act without hesitation. Jean-Claude Van Damme was in Columbus that very week, hosting a charity seminar for veterans. The Belgian actor was more than a celebrity in Jack's eyes. He was a disciplined martial artist with a soldier's heart. They had met years earlier at a fundraiser, stayed in touch, and promised each other. When the cause was real, when lives were on the line, they would step up. Jack hit a secure number on his sat phone. It rang once before being answered. "Jack, what's wrong?" Van Damme's accent carried urgency. "I've got a girl, 16, bound to a tree in the middle of this storm. Location's near Miller's Creek, outside Oakfield. I can't get there fast enough. You're closer." There was no hesitation. "Send me coordinates. I'm going." Within minutes, Van Damme was in a battered pickup, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. His hands gripped the wheel like a fighter clenching his fists before a round. Each mile was slower than he wanted, but the urgency in Jack's voice left no room for doubt. This wasn't a stunt or a movie script. This was life or death. Back at the tree, Emma's phone buzzed weakly in her palm, the battery draining. She clung to the sound of Jack's voice, to the promise that she wasn't alone. But the storm pressed harder, the oak above groaning as wind threatened to split its massive limbs. Her body sagged, energy draining fast. "Emma, listen to me," Jack said over the line. "Help is closer than you think. Do you see headlights?" Her vision blurred with rain and exhaustion, but then, through the sheets of water, she saw a glow bouncing across the fields. Headlights. Getting closer. Emma's breath caught. "You're not going to die here," Jack said. "Not tonight. Hold on." The pickup skidded to a stop near the oak. The door slammed open and a figure sprinted through the storm. He wasn't in costume, wasn't on a movie set. He was just a man in soaked jeans and a jacket, his face set with determination. Jean-Claude Van Damme reached the tree, drew a knife from his belt, and with one swift motion sliced through the rope binding Emma's wrists. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing, clinging to him as thunder cracked overhead. "Easy, easy," Van Damme murmured, steadying her. "You're safe now." The phone slipped from her hand, still connected. Jack's voice came faintly from the mud. "Status." Van Damme pressed it to his ear. "She's alive. Weak, cold, but alive. I've got her." Jack exhaled, relief breaking through his iron control. "Good. Hold position. I'm less than an hour out." The storm roared around them, but for the first time all night, Emma felt warmth. Not from the weather, but from the certainty that someone had kept a promise. She wasn't alone anymore, and Oakfield had no idea what storm was truly about to hit. Wind hammered the pasture like a living thing, flattening the grass in furious waves as the pickup slewed to a stop. Jean-Claude Van Damme hit the mud running, a triangle of headlight cutting through rain towards the oak's black tower. The air tasted metallic, ozone and bark and the wet tang of churned earth. Emma was a pale blur lashed to the trunk, head lolling, lips blue. The rope was slick as eels, and the knot had welded tight under water and strain. "Hey, stay with me," he said, voice level and close. "The way you talk across the rain mid-round." He slid a palm between rope and skin to shield her wrist, then drove the blade edge first into the soaked cord. A gust snapped branches above them with a rifle crack. He cut lower first, always below the weight, so when the top strands parted she wouldn't drop against the torn bark. 1, 2, 3 short strokes and tension bled from the rope. He pinned her with his hip to keep her steady and severed the last loop. The knot spat apart. Emma sagged. "I've got you." He scooped an arm around her shoulders. She was rigid with shivering and yet frighteningly limp, the way deep cold hollowed a body out. He shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her, tucking the collar tight under her chin. "Blink for me." She tried, tears mixed with rain. The flip phone fell to the mud, still alive, a thin wire of sound. Van Damme crouched, pressed it to his ear. "It's Jean-Claude. She's free." Jack Reeves's voice came through the static like taut cable. "Condition? Cold, weak, coherent enough to follow voice. Rope burns both wrists, superficial bleeding. She's on her feet with support." He pulled Emma tight under his shoulder and steered her towards the truck. The wind shoved them sideways. A branch sheared off and slammed into the ground where her knees had been seconds earlier. "We're moving." "Copy," Jack said. "My team is 6 out. Keep her awake, keep her talking. Do not rub her limbs. Shelter, dry, slow rewarm. We'll take it from there." The pickup's cab was a small universe of blessed heat and steamed glass. Van Damme sat her in the passenger seat, cranked the heater, and found a blanket from behind the seat back. He shook it out, a thunderhead of wet dust, and wrapped her shoulders and torso, careful to leave her neck clear. He pushed a bottle of water under the heater vents for a few beats, then nudged it to her lips. Small sips. Don't gulp. "They left me," she whispered, the words thin and ragged. Brad, said no one would." Her mouth trembled. "Jack said you were closer." He was right. He smiled, quick and reassuring. "I'm not a doctor, but I follow instructions very well." She huffed a ghost of a laugh. The cab filled with the smell of wet wool and hot plastic. Her breath fogged in soft clouds she could see now, controlled, countable. He turned the vents away from her hands and aimed them across her core. "We warm you from the middle out," he said. "Safe way. Team's almost here." Headlights rolled over the field, a squat silhouette shouldering through rain, as if the weather were just another bad road. The Humvee took the last ridge like a tide and slid to a stop, nose to nose with the pickup. 4 doors opened in near unison. The men who came out moved like parts of a well-built watch, quick but never hurried, each task already apportioned, each angle already covered. The first to the cab was a broad-shouldered medic with a face that could have been carved out of calm. "Staff Sergeant Cooper," he said, gentle in that way only people accustomed to chaos manage. "You're Emma? Good. We're going to make you warm and board, all right?" He checked pupils with a penlight, touched the pulse at her neck, watched her chest rise. He didn't ask about the storm. He asked about numbers. On a scale of 1 to 10, how cold? 11, she said, and it surprised her that she could joke. That's a very honest 11. He slid a foil pack from his kit and cracked a chemical warmer with his palm. "This goes here." He tucked it under her armpit, then another along her flank, then layered a reflective blanket over the wool. "No rubbing. You're doing great." The second man, rangy and quiet, planted a compact antenna at the truck's hood and scanned the horizon from beneath a dripping boony hat. "Mitchell," he said to no one in particular and to everyone. "No lightning within 5 miles. Window looks decent." Jack approached last. He had the same eyes the phone had carried through the storm, clear, anchored, the kind that gave you someplace to stand while the ground moved. He leaned in through the open door. "Emma?" It wasn't a question. It was her name used like a lifeline. She looked up, and for a moment she wasn't in a truck at all, but 8 years back, in summer light under a tree, a young officer teaching her how to braid rope and read cloud lines. Time folded. She reached for his sleeve. "You came. I promised." He rested one hand, gloved and firm, against the blanket at her shoulder. "You did exactly what you should. You called, you endured, you stayed smart. We finish it now." Van Damme slid out to give them room. The rain slackened, a grace note between waves. Cooper hooked a thermometer to her ear, checked the number without announcing it, and nodded to Jack. "Moderate, trending upward passive rewarm, no signs of altered mental status. She's tough." "She always was," Jack said, a corner of his mouth tilting. "Transport?" "Short hop," Cooper replied. "Better to keep her here than bounce her across flooded roads. A stove, dry clothes, warm broth. Ideal. Home?" "Home," Emma said immediately, the word instinctive. "My parents. They'll be worried." Jack looked to Mitchell. "Signal?" "Spotty, but I can punch through on SAT for a short call," Mitchell said, already dialing. "I'll patch you." Jack took the handset. "Robert, it's Jack. I have Emma. She's cold and tired, but okay. We're bringing her to you now." A rush of air came through the tiny speaker, someone exhaling the first breath they'd allowed in hours. "Thank God," Robert Wilson said, voice rough. "Sarah has the stove lit. We'll be ready." Jack passed the phone back and turned to Van Damme. "You moved fast?" "So did you." Van Damme's grin flickered, then settled into a sober line. "She almost ran out of seconds." Jack's jaw ticked once. "Almost doesn't count tonight." They moved as a file. Mitchell took point across the swamp track, scanning with his headlamp. Cooper and Van Damme walked the flanks of the pickup, keeping pace with the vehicle as if it were a stretcher. Jack stayed by the passenger door, one hand braced on the frame, eyes on Emma. The wind had a last tantrum of gusts, then fell to angry mutters. Mud slapped under tires, water hissed against metal. The farmhouse rose out of the weather's gray, square and solid, windows throwing buttery squares of light across puddled yard. The back door opened before they knocked. Sarah Wilson stood there with a towel in her hands and a fierceness in her eyes that put the storm to shame. The second she saw Emma, the towel dropped. She reached, reflexive and careful at once, and Cooper guided the blanket-wrapped bundle into her arms. "She needs slow warmth," Cooper said softly, already reading the room. "Core first. We'll talk you through." Sarah nodded, tears slicking the corners of her eyes. "I can do that." Robert was right behind her. shoulders lowered as if a load had slipped off at last. He clasped Jack's forearm with both hands, then squeezed Van Damme's shoulder. "Thank you," he said once, like a vow. "Later," Jack said. "Let's get her numbers right." They turned the living room into a field ward without making it look like one. Cooper set Emma on the couch nearest the wood stove, layered quilts over the reflective blanket, and angled the heat so it washed the air rather than blasting her skin. He handed Sarah a mug. "Lukewarm, small sips every couple of minutes. If she's nauseous, pause. We're avoiding shocks." Emma's fingers closed around the mug. The ceramic's gentle warmth bloomed up her wrists, into the place below her sternum where the cold had burrowed deepest. The shaken eased notch by notch, replaced by a heavy weariness that she recognized now as safety asserting itself. She kept her eyes on Jack because if she looked away, the night might still be there. He pulled a chair close. Water dripped off his jacket to the mat with tiny ticking sounds. "You did well," he said with the quiet pride of someone who has seen courage in hard places and knows it when it shows up. "You called, you held, you told me where." She swallowed. "I remembered what you taught me, one thing at a time." "Exactly." He tipped his head toward Van Damme, who had stepped back to give the family room but lingered near the kitchen archway. "And you had help." Emma shifted under the blankets, the wool rasping pleasantly against newly thawed skin. "Thank you," she said to him. He lifted a hand. "I only cut rope. A glance to Jack, pulled strings." Cooper checked her ear again and made a notation on a scrap card. 96.4, he murmured for Jack's ear alone. "We'll be fine with passive and liquids." "Good," Jack said. "We don't move her tonight unless we have to." The house breathed, a living thing again instead of a shelter under siege. The stove snapped and settled. The wind pawed at the eaves with less anger. On the table, the old clock thunked its slow heartbeat. Then Mitchell's SAT handset buzzed. He caught Jack's eye, angled away, and listened. When he returned, the easy lines were gone from his face. "Heads up," he said, voice low. "Dawson's spinning. He's mobilized a convoy of relief. Generators, volunteers, cameras. They're aiming for this end of the county at first light." Robert's mouth flattened. "Of course he is." Mitchell wasn't finished. "He's also filed charges on Dylan Cooper, vehicle theft, reckless endangerment. Sheriff's deputies are gearing up to act on it as roads clear." Sarah's jaw set. "The boy who came back for Emma? He saved her life." "He's the easy target," Jack said, thinking 3 moves ahead, because there was no other way to think around men like Richard Dawson. Shift attention. Discredit witnesses. Manufacture a different story before the real one gels. Van Damme leaned a shoulder to the doorframe. "Journalists love a hero with trucks and lights. They love a better story more." Jack's eyes met his. "We'll give them one." Sarah looked up from Emma, who'd steadied enough to cradle the mug between both hands. "What happens next?" she asked. The question wasn't frightened. It was practical. Plans were how you rebuilt fences after wind, how you walk the line after flood. "Next," Jack said, "we keep Emma warm and quiet. We call the sheriff ourselves, not the deputies, and request he come here directly. We document everything, rope, bark, the call log. At dawn, we're ready when Dawson's show arrives." He glanced to Van Damme. "If those cameras need a reason to point at the truth, you can be that reason." "I can talk," Van Damme said with a small, rueful smile. "But facts are better than spin." "We'll have both," Jack said. Emma watched them with the velvety exhaustion that comes when the worst has finally happened and no longer owns you. She found Jack's gaze again. "You won't leave?" "Not until it's finished." He tapped 2 knuckles softly on the arm of her chair, a private signal that meant, "We're here. We're not going anywhere." Rest now. She let her eyes close, not in surrender, but in trust. The room blurred to warmth and low voices and the steady rhythm of people who knew what they were doing. Across town, in a house where glass gleamed and floors carried footsteps like rumors, Richard Dawson stood before a mirror and fixed a bright relief smile to his face. "Get the generators loaded," he told his assistant on speaker. "Call Channel 7, tell them we're heading east where the damage is worst, and get in touch with the sheriff's office about that boy. I want the record clear before breakfast." He adjusted his tie, satisfied with the reflection. A man who showed up, who got things done, who made problems disappear. "We'll be first on the scene," he said. "People remember first." Back at the farmhouse, Jack checked the latch on the back door and the hinges on the front. Old habits. Cooper dimmed the lamp so Emma could drift. Mitchell set an alarm for the hour when signals tend to clear. Van Damme rinsed mud from his hands in the sink and accepted a cup of coffee he didn't need. Morning would come. So would cameras and deputies and stories dressed up as truth. That was fine. The actual truth was already in the room, warming under quilts, breathing easier with each minute. And Jack Reeves was already planning where to stand when the next round landed. Underscore, 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 underscore Emma. Slept in small, even breaths, color gradually returning to her cheeks. When she woke again, the window was a flat, pale square. The worst edges of the storm had filed themselves down. Her first thought was of the tree, still standing. Her second was of the door, still guarded. Jack was there, hands around a mug gone cool. He rose when she stirred. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been rung like a bell," she said, voice creaky but whole. "You sound like one, too." He smiled. "Stay under the blankets. Sheriff's on his way." "And Dawson?" she asked. "Also on his way," Van Damme called from the kitchen, where he was tying back his damp hair with an elastic someone had provided. "With an audience." Emma settled deeper into warmth. "Okay," she said. She looked from one to the other, the soldier who had kept a promise, the fighter who had bought her time. "Let's finish this." Outside, the wind turned from a shove to a steady hand. The gravel in the lane clicked once. First car of the morning. The storm had broken by dawn, but Oakfield was still drowned in mud and silence. The Wilsons' farmhouse sat like a lone beacon in the gray morning, wood stove smoke rising against the pale sky. Inside, Emma dozed near the fire, swaddled in quilts, her face flushed with returning warmth. Outside, the crunch of tires on gravel signaled that the quiet would not last. Richard Dawson arrived with noise and theater. His convoy of trucks rolled up the lane. Headlights blazing, beds stacked with generators and crates stamped Agricor. Cameramen followed, shielding lenses with plastic bags, eager to capture the image of a wealthy patron delivering salvation after the storm. Dawson himself stepped out of a polished SUV, umbrella held over his head by an assistant. His suit was immaculate, his smile rehearsed. "This is what leadership looks like," he announced to the cluster of reporters. "While others cower in their homes, we bring relief." But when he turned toward the farmhouse, expecting gratitude, he found something else entirely. Sheriff Daniels stood waiting at the porch, hat low against drizzle. Jack Reeves was beside him, boots planted, eyes steady. Jean-Claude Van Damme lingered near the fence line, arms crossed, his presence drawing cameras like a magnet. Dawson faltered, but only for a breath. "Sheriff," he said smoothly, "I'm here to coordinate aid. I trust we're all on the same page." "No, Richard," Daniels replied, "not this time." He nodded toward Jack. "Go ahead." Jack stepped forward, rain dripping off his jacket. He held up Emma's phone in a clear evidence bag. "This is the call Emma Wilson made when she was left to die tied to an oak. Her voice, her words, time-stamped. That's proof." He pointed to a second bag containing the cut ropes, still frayed and stained. "These were binding her wrists when we arrived." Reporters shifted, lenses refocusing. Dawson's smile strained. "That proves nothing. Kids play games. Accidents happen." Before he could spin further, Van Damme raised his voice. "Accidents don't leave rope burns. Accidents don't happen with cameras waiting for a father to pose as a hero." He gestured towards the farmhouse window, where Emma now stood, pale but alive, staring out. "That girl was almost killed. You want the truth? Look at her." The air shifted. The journalists turned, not to Dawson's crates, but to the girl in the window. Their flashes went off in a storm of their own. Brad Dawson, dragged along in his father's shadow, broke under the weight. "It wasn't an accident," he shouted, voice cracking. Mud splashed as he stumbled forward. "I tied her up. I wanted to scare her, make her pay, but I didn't mean—" He froze as his father's hand clamped his arm. "Not another word," Richard hissed. But it was too late. The confession hung heavy, undeniable. Sheriff Daniels stepped between them. "Bradley Dawson, you're under arrest for unlawful restraint, reckless endangerment, and attempted assault." "Richard, step aside." The cameras caught everything. Richard's outrage, Brad's collapse, the deputies leading him away. The AgriCorp trucks, once symbols of power, now looked like stage props abandoned after a failed play. Jack turned to the reporters, voice calm but cutting. "Oakfield doesn't need heroes who buy headlines. It needs accountability. Last night, one girl's courage and one phone call exposed the truth," Van Damme added, his accent sharp and clear. "And the truth is stronger than any storm." The shutters clicked. The story was no longer Dawson's to control. Inside, Emma leaned against her mother's shoulder, trembling not from cold, but from the sudden release of fear. Through the window, she saw Jack standing solid, Van Damme commanding attention, and the sheriff doing his duty. For the first time, she felt the tide turn. And Oakfield, watching from behind curtains and through TV screens, began to believe that change had finally arrived. 6 months passed, and Oakfield no longer looked like the same town. The storm had been violent, but it was nothing compared to the upheaval that followed the Dawsons' fall. Where fear and silence once ruled, something new had begun to take root: accountability. The Wilson farmhouse, once a place marked by tragedy, had become a quiet symbol of resilience. Emma, though still carrying faint scars on her wrists, had returned to school stronger than anyone expected. She no longer walked the halls with her head down. Instead, she carried herself with a steadiness that came only from surviving the storm and facing down cruelty. The whispers that once mocked her now carried a different tone. Respect, even awe. At the high school, change had been swift and firm. The school board, pressured by parents and under the watchful eye of the sheriff, enacted a strict anti-bullying code. No longer would students like Brad Dawson be free to terrorize others under the protection of family wealth. A new hotline was set up, anonymous reporting encouraged, and a clear message was sent. Silence would no longer protect the powerful. Emma herself became part of that change, speaking quietly, but with conviction at a school assembly. "Strength isn't measured by how many people fear you," she said, her voice carrying through the gymnasium. "It's measured by how many people you protect." The Dawsons, once untouchable, were now shadows of their former selves. Brad, after his outburst and arrest, was sent to a strict military academy as part of a plea agreement. For the first time in his life, his arrogance met real consequences: discipline, humility, and the absence of privilege. Reports filtered back of a young man struggling, breaking down, and slowly being rebuilt by structure harsher than anything his father had ever imposed. Richard Dawson, meanwhile, faced the storm he could not buy his way out of. Agricor launched an internal investigation, uncovering years of financial manipulation and cover-ups. Investors pulled out, his board stripped him of his chairmanship, and his name, once synonymous with Oakfield's prosperity, was now spoken with disdain. And through it all, Jack Reeves remained a steady figure. He did not seek thanks or recognition. Officially, he had returned to his role at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, but he had also quietly arranged a transfer that allowed him to be closer to Oakfield. His reasoning was simple. He had given his word to Emma years ago, and words to Jack carried the weight of steel. He often visited the Wilson farm on weekends, sometimes helping Robert mend fences or joining Sarah for a simple meal. For Emma, his presence was more than reassurance. It was proof that promises could be kept. Jean-Claude Van Damme, true to his word, also left a mark on Oakfield. In partnership with local schools, he funded a modest but well-equipped gym where students could learn martial arts, discipline, and respect. The opening ceremony drew more attention than anyone expected, not because of his fame, but because of his speech. Strength is not about who can hit hardest. It's about who stands up when others fall. Oakfield knows this now. Emma proved it. His words etched themselves into the town's memory. On a cold winter afternoon, Emma returned to the oak tree. Snow covered the ground, muffling her steps as she approached the place that had nearly been her grave. The tree stood solid, bark darkened by moisture, branches bare but unbroken. She placed her palm against its trunk, not with fear, but with quiet defiance. The place no longer haunted her. It had become part of her story, a chapter she had survived. Behind her, boots crunched softly in the snow. Jack's familiar voice broke the silence. "How's your oak?" She turned, smiling faintly. "Stronger than it looks." A little farther back, Van Damme lifted a thermos and waved, his grin disarming the chill. "Hot tea," he called, his accent coloring the words. "Best way to end a cold day." Emma laughed softly, the sound carried on the crisp air. For the first time in months, she felt not like a victim, but like someone who had taken back her life. Oakfield had learned something through her ordeal. Storms pass, lies collapse, but truth and courage endure. And as long as people like Jack Reeves kept their promises, and voices like Jean-Claude Van Damme's carried the truth where it needed to be heard, the town would never fall back into silence. The storm was gone. What remained was stronger.